A lot of young parents are struggling with the decision. Do we committed to the sport or do we go to church? And here's the thing. Right now, that whole conversation about, well, we committed to that sport and I really don't want them to break their commitments has come to such fruition. Children go more to their sports teams than they do to the church. And it's an astronomical number. Most parents are choosing to go to church with their children 1 to 2 times a month. And the danger in that is, how does a child begin to understand the picture of the story of the Bible?
All right, here we go. And I'm always careful when I reply to 60-second clips or shorter that, of course, I could be missing some context, but I don't think it matters here. What was just said is more than enough for me to communicate 3 or 4 points that I want to, and then we're going to end the episode by doing a quick comparison of what children might be getting from church versus what they might be getting from sports. And as someone who is heavily involved in both, I think I have a pretty good angle on this. So the first thing that I'd want to say about this is just to understand motive. Church is a business. And if you need to understand this better, see either of these 2 videos here. But like any other business, say a restaurant that sees that their attendance is down, they're looking for the reason, and then they're trying to overcome that reason so they can make more money, turn a profit, stay in business, etc. And that's fine when you have the straightforwardness of, I have a business, I want to provide a service, and I want to get paid for it. But church is always in this murky middle ground, like, oh, we're here for you, and yeah, we need your money, but it's just so we can serve you better. And even if that's true, it's not the only truth. And when you communicate it like it's the only truth, that's when it then becomes dishonest. I've been around enough church leadership and conversations to know that at their weekly staff meeting, they were probably going over their finances and their attendance, because those things are, of course, completely linked. And they were like, hey, it seems like it's down, and there's a billion reasons for that, but they also probably noticed that it's especially down for people that had kids of a certain age. And as they continue to dig, they came to a conclusion. And again, this is me guessing at the beginning of this, but still, if we're majoring in the majors and talking about church on average and this kind of a thing, I think I'm spot on. And they identify a problem. And then what is so common is the lead pastor will take that problem and address it in the following Sunday sermon. A lot of people just have this idea that a pastor is sitting around in his office waiting to hear from God and comes up with an inspirational idea that God wants him to communicate this message. Most of the time, these messages are responses to needs of the church. And the need of this church is, we need more butts in seats. That attracts more people. That attracts more money. So I wonder, what is this pastor really upset about? Is he really in fear of the spiritual well-being of their children? Or is it simply that his business is starting to fail? And again, when you take into account the claims of Christianity, of religion, how fragile does it look to need people to show up on a weekly basis to be reminded of the objective truth that has been put on our hearts? If your religion needs weekly attendance to survive, maybe the problem isn't sports getting in the way. Maybe it's the religion itself. Point 2 I would make is, what's the real danger here? Is it really dangerous for kids to miss out on hearing about how they're so sinful and worthless, to be berated with shame and guilt, or promises of heaven and paradise based off what they think, do, and believe? It's weird because pastors especially will say that it's not religion, it's relationship. And yet this pastor is going off about how the religion part of it, the weekly ritual part of it, is not being met. But if these parents and their children have a relationship with Christ, can it not afford to miss out on 1 Sunday or 2 Sundays of the month? How little do you trust those parents, by the way, as their leader, their shepherd, to shepherd their children without you? Apparently not at all. And isn't that what a pastor should be teaching his congregants anyways? That Jesus is always with you? That, yeah, it's not about religion? That you don't need a building to know God? Nope. Because it directly contradicts their business, which is people showing up. But again, going back to this, what's the real danger here? I'd love to just ask him, what do you think will actually happen if a child, for the couple years that they're at this level of competitive sports, misses 1 to 2 Sundays a week? What do you think will happen then? The devil will steal their soul? They'll start doing drugs and having premarital sex? Is it really so bad if they're missing out on a couple weeks of fear-induced indoctrination? And by the way, this is all with a full understanding that church can be beneficial for creating community and families and friendship and things to this nature, but there's also the disbeneficial parts, and there's also the recognition of how unfair this is coming from the pastor. But the thing that bugged me the most was the very last thing the pastor said, that without them coming to church, the danger is in them not being able to properly understand the story of the Bible, or however he put it. It's roughly like that. Isn't it amazing that the true word of God, the perfect word from the perfect being, cannot be read like any other book? That you must from a young age go and be taught what it means. Because if you just read it for yourself, if you just read it plainly, if you just let words mean what they mean, you will too quickly see all of the issues with this God, with his morality, with his chosen people, with the contradictions and incongruencies. We can't have that. We need, as the church, as the spiritual advisors, to make sure that when kids engage with the Bible, they have the proper context for when a genocide is justified. That when they engage with the Bible, they can understand that slavery was a good thing. This was God being generous to the people that otherwise would have been starving to death. See, everything in its proper context makes sense, but you got to bring them here. I got to help them understand this. Noah's Ark is a thing of beauty. Look at God's grace. And it's not just apologizing for the Old Testament. Of course, the New Testament needs a ton of help. How else are they going to figure out what the book of Revelation means? How else are they going to figure out what Jesus wants of them? Or should I say what Paul wants of them? Who's going to properly explain the sexism and the blood rituals? Who's going to help these kids parse out Jesus being their best friend and loving Savior and being so ready to torture them forever in hellfire? Get those kids in the building so that I can properly make sure they're indoctrinated, because Christianity benefits when more people believe it. And people who their entire job is wrapped up, their literal ability to provide for their family is wrapped up in how many people believe, continue to believe, and continue to show up, then I don't think you can have objectively fair or good motives. And that's when you get yourself in a position where you are criticizing families for honoring their commitments with their children who are involved in sports, which is a good thing. But the commitment to God needs to be higher, doesn't it? And the only way pastors can conceive of what commitment to God looks like is if people do exactly what they want them to be doing, exactly how much they want them to be doing it. So who's really benefiting from church attendance? The pastor, for sure. The religion itself. But what about the child? Are they gaining anything besides boredom, anxiety, or guilt? Sometimes, okay, let me be fair, not all sports are perfect at communicating good messages and providing a healthy environment. Just like not all churches have absolutely nothing valuable to contribute. But again, if we're kind of talking about averages, and if I were a betting person where a child is going to get more benefit or receive less harm, I will take sports all day, every day, over the church. Variables notwithstanding, of course, the parent and how they communicate these things about church or sports are also going to have a large impact over what is being received, what is being internalized, and how the child is moving forward because of it. So, with as much nuance and understanding as I can put out there, I do know there are some good churches and some bad sports things, but I never once had any coach tell me that I was going to go to hell or that I was evil. Maybe get off of your high horse about how important it is for these kids to show up to your indoctrination session while missing out on all of the benefits that do come with sports and teamship. So we're going to talk about that right now. Let's make a list. Let's start with church first. Again, speaking in generalities, church often teaches children to not question, pray, and obey. There's a lot of fear-based thinking that is introduced. Believe or burn. The self-loathing that occurs. Kids being told that they're broken from birth. Again, I know I'm not sharing all the data. I've done this in other episodes, but it is unbelievably clear how harmful it is to the developing psyche of a child to be told these things at a young age. The sexual shaming that occurs, girls are told one of many horrific analogies to help them understand not to give it away before marriage, whether they are tape that will lose the stickiness, gum that will lose the flavor, and all other kinds of horrific things that tie up their value as an individual, as a human being, on their virginity and their ability to please a man later in life by remaining pure. That's child sexual abuse. I don't care what you say. And purity culture for the boys is no walk in the park either. You're talking to boys in the height of their puberty as their hormones are raging, and you're telling them that it's sin. And by the way, I have to say it because I know there's so many uneducated Christians who believe in this insane black or white fallacy that if you don't teach a child the church version of sexual purity, that you're totally fine with ultimate promiscuity and child pregnancy and all of these other things. No, there's middle ground. Just because parents are secular doesn't mean that they want their child to go through certain experiences that can obviously be negative. I hate that line of thinking so much. At church, faith is praised more than reason. So you have this anti-intellectualism. They silence doubt by talking about how the devil might be speaking to you, tricking you, tempting you, deceiving you. There's an element of authoritarianism, not only from God on high, but just within church leadership. These are your elders. These are people placed in positions of authority by God himself. They are not to be questioned. They use guilt as a motivator. Jesus died for you, so you owe him this. And again, at the end of the day, church is one of the biggest places where indoctrination happens. On purpose, repetition, built in and designed into the kids' services to get them to believe things without evidence, to adhere to principles and rules without critical thought. And that's my short list. But let's look quickly at sports. Let's get on this side of the column here. And I'll say it a third time. Yes, of course, there are harm that can come from sports programs or coaches. But from the averages, it's just nowhere near what we see with the church. What do you get, though, just by participating in sports, even without like the best coach or program? Teamwork. First of all, something that kids don't get in the 1-minute tug of war game before they are sat down and told what sinners they are. You learn how to communicate. You learn how to support others when you're on a sports team. Discipline, setting goals, working hard, pushing yourself, bettering yourself, seeing improvement and growth. Resilience, learning how to lose with grace, how to lose in general, which is such an important skill set, but also how to win well. When your coach chastises you for gloating and says, no, this was one game, get back to work. The body confidence that you get from playing sports, not only are you growing and becoming stronger and gaining more endurance, you're learning control and coordination, and that's physical. And then there's also emotionally. You have to manage frustration and nerves and adrenaline and doubt and despair during a bad season or a bad game. If you have a good program or coach, you're learning about exercise and nutrition and the importance of rest. There's tons of opportunities to learn and grow in leadership and cooperation, helping your teammates, peer accountability. You're being counted on by other people and you're counting on other people. Maybe you get to be the captain and display some leadership, or maybe you are not the captain and you can learn to support. And then the joy of it, the fun of it, the celebrating, the playfulness, and all the amazing growth that comes along with that. Maybe a better way to put this is, if you could only send your kid to one of these two camps, which one would you choose? Your kids are going to grow up one way or another. And every decision you make and every minute you spend with them and what you sign them up for absolutely shapes who they become and how they orient themselves in society and what benefit that they can provide and receive. And I've just seen too much. I understand the millions and millions and millions and millions of people who are waking up from religion and looking back on their time in the church and seeing how unhealthy it really was. And so, yeah, for you that are in the church and still believing, you're going to feel defensive. But I get thousands of comments a week, a multitude of which are telling me about their experience at church, what they're finally learning in their 30s and 40s that they should have been learning when they were 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. By the way, we're not counting on sports to make these kids amazing. That's the thing. Like, it's already a weird comparison because people actually believe that a child going to church means that for the rest of their life they will do this, right? It's in the scriptures. Train up a child now so that they do not depart when they are older. But no one's making that claim for sports. Sports are just this added benefit of life. It's fun. Most parents don't think their kids are going to go pro when they sign them up for sports. They do it so that they can learn all those skills, so that they can make friends, so they can be a part of something bigger than themselves that isn't telling them they're awful and wicked and deserve hell. Again, church could do a lot of this and gets close to doing a lot of it, but then there's all the baggage and it steals from it. How many kids look back on their time playing sports as horrible and negative. And by the way, there are some kids that maybe just aren't cut out for it. They're not as physical. They're not interested in it. And their parents can force them into it. And it can become a bit of a nightmare. I am not denying that. But I would say that's more on the parents. No parents required for all the harm that happens in church. And then there would be equivalencies for getting them involved in band or speech and debate or something else that does fit them where they can still get all those benefits that I listed. So we're talking about sports, but really what we're talking about is any extracurricular that might be in competition with church. Hopefully that caveat helps cover a few points. But what I was saying there is how many kids look back on their time in sports and cringe and see the unhealth of it compared to how many people are looking back on church in that way. If your child never steps foot in a church, but they grow up competent and confident and kind and generous, what did they miss? According to Christians, it's just one thing: the ability to go to heaven by knowing the truth and believing the right things that are in direct contradiction with every other spiritual and religious claim out there. That's all you've got. That's the only thing you can hang your hat on. And it's the thing that so many of us now know is not true. The truth is, and I'll end with this, that a child can learn more about grace and failure and integrity and teamwork and communication and 1,000 other wonderful things in one season of soccer or whatever than they might get from a year or a decade in Sunday school. I really believe that down to my core. So, despite how it ended up sounding, this is not me advocating that everyone needs to be in sports. But if sports are working well for you and your family and they're important to your children, please don't let them miss out by some feeling of debt that you owe your local pastor, or being influenced by his guilt-tripping sermon that your priorities are not in the right place. Parenthood is already hard enough without some supposedly spiritual authority telling you you're doing it wrong and then missing out on all of these wonderful benefits on this side just to do this. So that's it. That's really all I had for today. Thanks so much for being here. I've got a great episode lined up for Thursday, and until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support: my Iconoclast, Ann, Boris, Grant, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kitboga, Matthew, Perry, and Shawn; my Humanist heroes: Craig, James, Jarrod, Kristi, and Matthew; my Atheist advocates: Aquitar, Caleb, Dan, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Julie, Malcom, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas; as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel, please consider joining these fine people.